Flight attendant refuses black passenger water, shaken when he demands her termination as airline director. In the busy terminal of Los Angeles International Airport, LAX tension hung in the air like thick fog. Travelers hustled between gates, sipping overpriced coffees, glancing at departure screens and juggling last-minute phone calls. Among them stood a man who had no idea he was about to be humiliated on a flight that would change his life forever, and the life of the flight attendant who crossed him. This was not just another day in the skies. It was the day a hidden power and an act of prejudice would collide. Secrets would unravel, and a single glass of water would unleash a storm no one saw coming. Michael Braxton never imagined that a routine business trip from LAX to John F. Kennedy International Airport, JFK, could erupt into a life-altering confrontation. Standing at the Delta Airlines check-in counter, he glanced around at the swarming crowds. The lines were long, as always, and the hum of frantic conversation surrounded him. The overhead speakers announced delayed flights, rebookings, and final boarding calls. It was early morning, and people sipped coffees or energy drinks to stave off the grogginess of a red eye or an overly early start. Michael was a tall black man in his early 40s, sporting a neat business suit. He had recently joined Delta Airlines as an executive director on their board of directors, a fact he seldom advertised publicly, preferring to travel as quietly as possible. He believed in blending in with fellow passengers, experiencing flights from their perspective. That mindset helped him assess the real issues people encountered while flying cramped seats, unpredictable meal service, and the often underappreciated but vital role of flight attendants. That morning, Michael felt a bit exhausted. He had spent the last week crunching numbers, preparing strategic proposals for improving customer satisfaction, and examining ways to enhance training for flight staff. As he juggled his carry-on bag, a boarding pass and a smartphone buzzing with messages, he had no inkling of the storm looming ahead. Even as an airline executive, he was accustomed to travel stresses, but he did not expect bigotry or humiliation on a flight that showcased the airline he helped direct. If there was one thing Michael valued above all else, it was respect. And soon he would demand exactly that from the very people he trusted to uphold the airline's values. Up in the gate area, a young flight attendant named Tracy Hawkins busied herself with last-minute checks. Tracy was relatively new to the job, having graduated from flight attendant training just 6 months prior. She brushed a few strands of highlighted hair from her face and turned her attention to the pre-boarding announcements. Though she was still learning many on-the-job nuances, her bright smile and perfect posture betrayed no sign of nerves. She'd grown up dreaming of travel in enchanting cities in faraway places. Beaches with turquoise waters, gastronomic tours in Singapore, historical tours in Rome, you name it. Yet as the reality of her job set in, she began to realize the demands that came with the glamorous illusion. The job was stressful short layovers, constant time zone changes, and the occasional difficult passenger. Above all, there was an unspoken rule among seasoned flight attendants, a rule that sometimes manifested in subtle or overt biases about who deserved extra courtesy and who did not. Recently, Tracy had been chastised by her supervisor for not taking charge of difficult situations. She wanted to prove she could handle any scenario, but her approach leaned toward being overzealous. She hadn't quite learned how to balance authority with kindness, and that imbalance was teetering dangerously. The flight she was about to work promised to be a full house, complete with first-class passengers, business travelers, families with young children, and those in the main cabin crossing their fingers for overhead bin space. Tracy would soon learn that her power trip might lead her to cross boundaries she shouldn't, and that some passengers aren't who they seem. Michael settled into his seat in business class, removing his jacket, folding it neatly, and placing it in the overhead bin. Despite his relatively high position at Delta, he always adhered to the same standard as any paying passenger: follow the rules, respect the crew, and treat everyone with dignity. Seated near him was a group of colleagues returning from a tech conference, already discussing the latest software updates. A few rows ahead, an older gentleman was flipping through a newspaper, grumbling about a potential delay. Across the aisle, a young couple fidgeted excitedly, presumably heading to New York for a romantic getaway. Michael tapped his phone, checking on the flight plan. He knew the airline data the flight was at capacity, with a short-staffed cabin crew. Even a slight hiccup could spell trouble. But as an executive, his job was to identify these pinch points and address them at a strategic level. Most flight attendants appreciated his incognito approach, for it allowed them to be genuine. The last thing Michael wanted was special treatment, though ironically, it was the exact misinterpretation of his presence that would soon spark the incident of a lifetime. Tracy walked down the aisle distributing sanitized wipes and greeting each passenger. Her attitude was professional enough, but underlying tension tightened her shoulders. She kept glancing back toward the galley, where her senior colleague Serena was rummaging through the drink carts and making sure the snack supply was fully stocked. For Tracy, being new meant she was being judged for her courtesy, her efficiency, and her ability to control the cabin. She wanted to shine, but she had not learned that genuine kindness resonates far more than rigid authority. She paused at Michael's row, gave a tight-lipped smile, and then moved on without a word. Once everyone was seated, the flight attendants performed the safety demonstrations, guiding passengers on what to do in case of an emergency, how to fasten seatbelts properly, and where the exits were located. The plane taxied to the runway and lifted off into the morning sky. Clouds drifted past the windows as the engines roared. Many people settled in for a nap, while others opened laptops to finish business presentations or watch movies. Michael tried to relax, but a mild headache pricked behind his eyes. He concluded that a quick drink of water might help. Waiting for the seatbelt sign to turn off, he pressed the call button for assistance. Moments later, Tracy appeared. Her expression was impatient. He requested a bottle of water politely. She scanned the row, noticing that Michael was alone, and gave a reluctant nod. "I'll see what I can do," she said stiffly, before pivoting on her heel and leaving. It took longer than usual, almost 15 minutes. Michael was patient, telling himself that the flight crew was busy. Meanwhile, he watched Tracy serve other passengers in rows ahead, offering beverages, soda cans, and small water bottles. Yet for some reason, she skipped right over him. When she finally returned, her face looked even more guarded, and she said, "Sir, we're a bit short on stock. Perhaps you can wait until the regular service starts." Her tone was bland, almost dismissive, as though Michael's request was an inconvenience. Michael furrowed his brow. He had flown enough to know flight attendants carry extra water for passengers, especially in business class. Still, he decided not to make a fuss. "No problem," he replied, masking his confusion. Meanwhile, an uncomfortable knot formed in the pit of his stomach. Something felt off about this interaction, but he tried not to assume the worst. Service eventually began. Tracy and her colleague Serena brought out carts loaded with drinks, peanuts, cookies, and other assorted snacks for business class. Serena flashed a smile at Michael and asked him what he'd like to drink. Michael said, "Just water, please," adding that he'd like a second bottle because he had a nagging headache. As Serena reached into the cart, Tracy intervened abruptly, placing her hand over the bottles. "We have a limited supply," Tracy said, glancing pointedly at Michael before turning to Serena. "It's better to serve everyone else first." Serena looked puzzled. She had known Michael only as one of the many passengers on the flight, but even so, business class usually had enough water to go around. Besides, Serena was the senior attendant. She didn't appreciate being undermined by her junior colleague. "There's enough," Serena replied, her tone neutral. She handed Michael 2 small bottles. Tracy stood there, stiff as a rod, her jaw clenched, eyes flickering with disapproval. Michael thanked Serena. He tried to ignore the searing look from Tracy, but an unsettling wave of tension washed over him. There was no reason to be denied water, especially not in business class, and especially not repeatedly. Something in him stirred that intuitive sense that her behavior was targeted. He'd seen discrimination before, and he recognized its signs. The cold stare, the under-the-breath remarks, the subtle ways some service staff singled out minority passengers. He wasn't out to pick a fight, but he also wasn't about to let this pass unaddressed. He took a sip from one of the bottles, trying to steady himself. "Thank you, Serena," he said softly, making sure to catch Tracy's eye. She glared back, exuding an air of silent hostility that made the moment sizzle with tension. The flight continued smoothly for a while, with the captain announcing flight altitude and expected arrival time. Over the next hour, passengers in business class leisurely sipped coffee or wine, enjoyed small plates of snacks, and some even drifted off into short naps. Michael, however, remained restless. The uneasy interaction with Tracy hovered in his mind. Over the years, he had encountered subtle racism in various forms. Suspicious glares in upscale restaurants, extra scrutiny at security lines, or the assumption that he didn't belong in certain spaces. But it never got easier to swallow such humiliations. As a Delta Airlines director, Michael had made it a personal mission to foster inclusivity within the company. He believed that every passenger should be treated equally, regardless of race, gender, or background. He had advocated for advanced diversity training for flight attendants and staff, believing that real change started from within. Now, confronted with Tracy's attitude, he started to wonder if his efforts had truly trickled down. On the other side of the aisle, a middle-aged woman was watching the exchange with growing concern. She'd noticed how Tracy treated Michael differently, always a forced politeness, never the warmth or courtesy she gave to others. The woman caught Michael's eye and offered a sympathetic smile. He nodded in return, appreciating the solidarity. Yet he felt a pang of disappointment. No matter how high he rose in the corporate world, no matter how many policies he helped implement, prejudice still stalked him at 35,000 feet in the air. Meanwhile, Tracy busied herself with tasks, occasionally glancing at Michael as if he were an unwelcome guest. Each time she passed, her lips tightened. Serena, oblivious to the hidden tension, continued her normal routine, offering blankets, collecting trash, and answering call buttons with practiced efficiency. The plane soared on, but the conflict was set to escalate in ways no one could foresee. Michael decided to visit the restroom. As he stood up and made his way toward the front lavatory, he overheard Tracy speaking in hushed tones with another attendant near the galley. He couldn't catch every word, but he heard fragments. "He's so demanding. Thinks he owns the place." A cold certainty dawned on him. She was talking about him. He paused, heart pounding. The urge to confront her now welled up, but he decided it was best to gather facts calmly before taking any action. Confrontation in mid-flight could escalate quickly and create a chaotic environment for everyone. Returning to his seat, Michael tried to maintain composure. He decided that if any further incidents occurred, he would address them head-on. But within minutes, an announcement came over the intercom that a passenger in the rear economy section was feeling faint. Tracy and Serena hurried down the aisle with medical kits. From his seat, Michael could see Tracy kneeling beside an elderly passenger, offering her water-bottled water from the very same cart. His suspicion that her earlier denial was personal or even racially motivated only grew stronger. With a swirl of emotions inside him, anger, disappointment, and above all, sadness, Michael opened his laptop, attempting to focus on some work. But the spreadsheet in front of him blurred. Instead, his mind floated back to his own experiences with prejudice. He remembered being pulled over for driving in the wrong neighborhood as a college student, or the sideways looks he'd received at exclusive golf courses during corporate outings. Now, even at the top echelons of an airline's leadership, such bias refused to relent. He exhaled, deciding to keep calm. But inside, a fire burned. This time, he wouldn't just walk away. If Tracy refused to treat him with the respect any paying passenger deserved, he would be forced to reveal who he really was, and then demand accountability at the highest level. Midway through the flight, lunch service began. Tracy and Serena were preparing trays for the business class passengers, choice of chicken or pasta accompanied by salads, bread rolls, and dessert. As Tracy came down the aisle, Michael decided he needed to observe her behavior up close. When she approached, he politely requested a glass of water to go with his meal. Tracy's face hardened. "We're not serving water separately right now. You have water in your meal tray." Michael glanced at the small plastic cup on the tray, barely a few sips worth. He looked directly into Tracy's eyes. "I'd appreciate another glass, or even a bottle. I'm feeling a bit dehydrated, and since you're serving lunch, it shouldn't be a problem, right?" His tone was measured, lacking aggression, but firm enough to let her know he wasn't backing down this time. Several nearby passengers paused their conversations, sensing tension in the air. Tracy let out a small laugh that dripped with condescension. "We have rules and limited supplies, sir. Everyone else has to make do with what's provided." She gestured to the rest of the cabin. "It's just water. You can wait." Michael's pulse raced. "Is there a reason you won't serve me water?" he asked calmly, though his voice carried the unmistakable edge of suppressed anger. Tracy stared at him, her eyes momentarily flickering with something akin to resentment or even hate before she quickly turned away. "I'll get back to you," she said, but the words were laced with hostility. A hush fell over the aisle. A few passengers looked around, clearly uncomfortable, while others waited to see how the situation would resolve. Meanwhile, Michael was done waiting. He'd given her multiple chances, too many, perhaps. She had singled him out, refused him basic courtesy, and had done so in a glaringly disrespectful manner. If she continued this path, she would soon discover that the passenger she thought was beneath her was actually far above in rank, authority, and determination. An hour later, the tension had only worsened. Tracy avoided Michael's row entirely, even as she tended to other business-class passengers. As a result, Michael's tray remained uncleared, and he still had only that small plastic cup of water. This blatant neglect was noticed by others nearby. Some whispered among themselves, wondering if they should intervene. Most people, however, chose the path of least resistance, not wanting to cause trouble at 35,000 feet. Eventually, Serena came by and noticed Michael's untouched tray. "Sir, can I get that out of your way? Is everything all right?" she asked, genuine concern in her voice. Michael hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "Serena, I'm very disappointed in the way I've been treated by your colleague. I've requested water multiple times, and each time she's made excuses or refused. I'm not sure if she's overworked or—" He paused, selecting his words carefully. "If there's another reason. But this is unacceptable." Serena's cheeks flushed. She apologized profusely. "I'm so sorry, sir. We do have extra water, and there's no policy preventing us from giving you more." She quickly fetched 2 bottles and handed them to him. "I'll speak with her," Serena promised. Michael gave a slight nod, appreciating Serena's effort, but knowing that a conversation with Tracy might not be enough. The problem ran deeper than just one flight attendant's mood. It was about a pattern of prejudice, and if that prejudice was thriving on Delta flights, it was a direct contradiction to the corporate values he had helped shape. Despite himself, Michael couldn't fully enjoy the water. Each sip tasted of frustration and bitter irony. This was, after all, the airline he helped direct, and a flight attendant and ambassador of the brand was blatantly discriminating against him. He would not let it slide. As the flight progressed, Michael decided to break the tension by walking to the galley where Tracy stood reorganizing cups and cutlery. The narrow hallway behind the galley was cramped, but he needed privacy for a frank conversation. He approached her calmly, forcing a polite smile. "Tracy, do you have a moment?" She barely looked up from her task. "I'm busy. You should return to your seat," she replied curtly, her tone skating on the edge of rudeness. Michael sighed. "I understand you're busy, but this can't wait. I've asked you for water multiple times, and you've repeatedly refused or delayed my request. I want to understand why." Tracy slammed a drawer shut, her frustration palpable. She finally turned to face him, arms crossed. "Sir, I'm just following our policies," she snapped. "If you have a problem, talk to my supervisor." Michael nodded once. "Fair enough. But I need you to know something. I'm not just a passenger." He paused, choosing his words. "I'm actually a director on Delta's board. My role involves ensuring we provide top-tier service to every passenger, regardless of background. Can you see why I'm concerned that you've been treating me differently?" For a split second, shock flickered across Tracy's features before she quickly recovered. But Michael could sense the tremor of fear behind her eyes. She'd gone too far, and now the passenger she had belittled had revealed a position of power. Still, she clung to her pride. "You don't look like a director," she said, letting out a scoff. "Maybe you're making that up just to get your way." Michael raised an eyebrow, the sting of her comment washing over him. "I can assure you I'm not making it up," he replied, voice steady. "But thank you for confirming what I suspected, that you judged me on appearance." Tracy's face flushed a deep red. She sputtered, trying to formulate a comeback, but the words stuck in her throat. "I'm just doing my job," she managed to say. "We can't have passengers taking advantage of supplies." Michael blinked in disbelief. "By asking for water in business class, I'm taking advantage?" he asked, voice laced with astonishment. "That's quite an interpretation of your policies." He could see her losing ground. The moral high ground she'd tried to claim was collapsing. She turned away, a swirl of emotions contorting her features. "I don't have to stand here and listen to this," she declared. "I'll get the supervisor." Michael stepped aside, letting her pass, but his stomach churned with anger. The conversation only confirmed what he had feared from the moment she first denied him water. Tracy's prejudice ran deep enough that she felt emboldened to lie about company policy just to justify singling him out. As he watched her retreat, he knew the time for a quiet resolution was over. Tracy's behavior was so blatant, so unwavering that a formal complaint would be the only way to hold her accountable. But more than that, He needed to show her and others who might share her mindset that Delta Airlines would not tolerate racism or discrimination in any form. Even if it meant exposing his own position publicly, he was prepared to take that step. Michael returned to his seat, heart racing. He resolved that once they landed, he would contact the airline's top HR executive, a colleague with whom he shared a commitment to eradicate biases within the staff. And if that meant demanding immediate disciplinary action against Tracy, so be it. She might have believed she could lord her power over passengers, but Michael was about to show her the real chain of command. Not long after Michael returned to his seat, Serena approached him, apologizing profusely on behalf of the crew. She had spoken to Tracy, but the conversation had escalated. Tracy insisted she was following protocol, and she refused to admit any wrongdoing. Despite being the senior attendant on duty, Serena found herself at a loss. Tracy's intransigence was perplexing, especially for a new hire in her probationary period. Michael reassured Serena that he appreciated her kindness. "I understand this might be uncomfortable, but I need to speak to the captain about this situation," he said. In many airlines, the captain functioned not only as the pilot, but also as the ultimate authority on the aircraft. If a serious dispute arose, it was often the captain's responsibility to mediate or at least ensure the safety and well-being of everyone on board. Serena hesitated. "Let me see if Captain Jorgensen is available," she said. "He's pretty strict about the cockpit's no-disturbance policy during flight, but we'll see what can be done." While waiting, Michael fielded concerned glances from nearby passengers. Some had overheard bits of the altercation, and word was spreading that the flight attendant had refused a black man water for no apparent reason. A middle-aged passenger across the aisle leaned over. "If you need me to back you up, I will," she whispered. "I've seen how she treated you, and it was definitely wrong." Michael thanked her quietly, gratitude softening the tension in his chest. The passenger introduced herself as Linda, an attorney from Pasadena. She offered to provide a statement if necessary. Michael assured her he would let her know. Even in the midst of cruelty, there was solidarity, a small beacon of hope that told him not everyone turned a blind eye to injustice. A few minutes later, Serena returned to Michael's row, indicating that Captain Jorgensen could spare a moment to speak with him briefly near the cockpit door. Michael rose, acutely aware of the stares trailing him. As he made his way forward, he glanced at Tracy, who stood in the aisle, with a set jaw refusing to meet his gaze. Captain James Jorgensen was in his mid-50s, with the calm demeanor of someone who had piloted commercial jets for decades. His salt and pepper hair and serious expression suggested a seasoned professional who didn't tolerate nonsense. With the cockpit door propped open just a crack, he addressed Michael in a low voice. "I understand there's a situation." Mr. Michael offered his name, leaving out his corporate title for the moment. He explained in a concise but thorough manner what had transpired, the repeated refusals for water, the suspicion of targeted harassment, and Tracy's stubborn insistence on a non-existent policy. The captain listened intently, occasionally glancing at Serena for confirmation. She nodded gravely, adding that she too felt Tracy's actions had crossed a line. Captain Jorgensen sighed, rubbing his temple. "I'm sorry you've experienced this on my flight. Let me handle it as best I can right now. Once we land, I encourage you to file a formal complaint. In the meantime, your comfort is our priority." Michael nodded, his voice steadier than he felt. "I appreciate that, Captain. For the record, I've told Tracy that I'm a director on Delta's board, but she thought I was lying." Captain Jorgensen's eyes widened. "Understood. I'll talk to her personally before we touch down, and rest assured this will be properly documented." They exchanged parting words, and Michael returned to his seat, some measure of relief coursing through him. It was at least comforting to know that a figure of authority had recognized the gravity of the situation. Still, he couldn't shake the knot of dread in his stomach. Tracy's behavior was so brazen that he wondered if there were deeper, more systemic issues in flight attendant training. If she had treated him this way, how had she treated other black passengers or other minorities on previous flights? It was a question that weighed heavily on his mind. The rest of the flight was a tense stalemate. Tracy largely avoided the business class cabin, sticking to economy under the pretense of assisting other passengers. Serena and another attendant, Paul, handled the front portion of the aircraft. Occasionally, Michael saw Tracy hurry past, eyes averted, as though avoiding a scorching glare. He felt no triumph in seeing her subdued. Instead, he felt a strange sadness tinged with anger that this sort of behavior still existed so casually, so unapologetically. The hours crept by, and soon the captain announced they would begin their descent into JFK. Passengers secured tray tables and seats. Michael fastened his seatbelt, staring out the window at the city skyline below. He was bracing himself for a confrontation after they landed. He'd considered waiting to file a complaint quietly, but Tracy's behavior was so blatant that he felt compelled to make an on-the-spot statement. Letting her walk away to potentially treat the next passenger in the same manner was unthinkable. The wheels touched down smoothly. As the plane taxied to the gate, the flurry of movement commenced, people rummaging for bags, phones chiming overhead, bins creaking open. Michael remained seated, letting the row in front of him clear, and took one final moment to compose himself. He pictured the meeting he would have with HR, the emails that would be exchanged among senior executives, and the inevitable reports about Tracy's unprofessional conduct. It felt like a storm about to break. He had no idea just how big that storm would become, because once he stepped off that plane, the story would travel faster than any 747. An outraged passenger had posted clips of the incident on social media, capturing Tracy's dismissive actions. By the time Michael reached the terminal, his phone was already blowing up with notifications. A drama that began with a cup of water was about to swirl into a corporate and public relations reckoning. The moment Michael switched off airplane mode, his phone buzzed incessantly. Texts from friends, colleagues, and even acquaintances he hadn't spoken to in years flooded his screen. One urgent message was from a communications director at Delta, referencing a social media post that was going viral. Another was from the airline's vice president of human resources, urging him to call immediately. In a quiet corner near the arrival gate, Michael scrolled through his messages. Shell-shocked by how quickly word had spread. A short video apparently recorded by Linda, the attorney who had offered him support, showed Tracy refusing to serve water to Michael while serving another passenger moments later. The caption read, "Flight attendant refuses black man, water discrimination at 35,000 feet." It had already garnered tens of thousands of views in just a couple of hours. Comments ranged from outrage to demands for an immediate boycott of Delta. Some people shared their own similar experiences, turning the comments section into a chorus of shared grievances. Michael's heart sank. While he believed in transparency, he was also fiercely loyal to Delta, which he considered a generally forward-thinking airline. This incident was not only a personal affront, but now a public relations nightmare. He dialed the vice president of HR, a woman named Melissa Kramer. She picked up on the first ring. "Michael, are you okay?" she asked, voice thick with concern. "This is terrible. The company's phones are ringing off the hook with media inquiries." He took a deep breath. "I'm all right, Melissa. But we have a serious problem on our hands. I want to handle this appropriately." I also want to ensure that the flight attendant, Tracy Hawkins, faces immediate disciplinary action. If we're serious about zero tolerance, we can't sweep this under the rug." Melissa agreed. "We've already placed her on administrative leave, pending an investigation. The captain filed a detailed incident report. We'll likely escalate this further given the video evidence. Also, some top executives want you to come to headquarters as soon as possible for a briefing. The CEO might want to address this publicly." Michael thanked her and ended the call. As he stood there in the bustling airport, he felt a swirl of conflicting emotions: anger at the blatant discrimination, disappointment in how it reflected on Delta, and a sort of weary resolve to turn this crisis into a catalyst for real change. The phrase "hard karma" floated through his mind. Tracy's cruelty, laid bare for the world to see, was about to bring a reckoning she likely never anticipated. Before leaving the airport, Michael made his way to one of Delta's executive lounges. He wanted a quiet space to gather his thoughts and plan his next steps. As he sat in a corner, phone in hand, he composed an internal memo to the board of directors detailing the incident. While some of them already knew from phone calls and messages, he needed the record to be thorough and official. In calm, measured language, he described Tracy's repeated refusals to serve water, her overt hostility, and her disregard for basic passenger rights. The lounge staff, unaware of the drama, offered him coffee and asked if he needed anything else. He politely declined, noting the irony of being treated kindly here while he had to fight for a simple glass of water on the flight. Once he hit send, he knew there was no turning back. The wheels of corporate governance would now be in motion, pressing for swift accountability. A swirl of social media mentions continued to flood his phone. Public figures, celebrities, and activists began to share the video, amplifying the outcry. Hashtags like #DeltaDiscrimination and #WaterEquality started trending, turning a personal confrontation into a flashpoint for discussions about racial bias in the airline industry. It was as though the world needed a spark to ignite frustration over widespread inequities, and Tracy's behavior provided it. Michael felt torn. He didn't want to see the entire airline tarnished over one employee's misconduct, but he also understood how these narratives gain traction. One incident caught on camera can overshadow countless good experiences. Maybe he thought this will be the push the company needs to ensure better training, better policies, and a deeper commitment to fairness. As he prepared to leave the lounge, he braced himself for the days ahead. He would be in the media spotlight, whether he liked it or not. Later that afternoon, Michael arrived at Delta's corporate headquarters in Atlanta. The building's sleek glass facade and airy lobby felt familiar, yet tinged with a new tension. Executives bustled through the corridors, some stopping to offer Michael looks of sympathy, others simply nodding politely. He was ushered into a conference room with panoramic views of the city skyline. Seated around a large mahogany table were high-level executives, including the CEO, CFO, and General Counsel. They stood as Michael entered, a gesture of respect. The CEO, Robert Bob Jenkins, stepped forward, placing a firm hand on Michael's shoulder. "I'm truly sorry this happened," he said quietly. A hush fell as everyone took their seats. Melissa Kramer, the VP of HR, was the first to speak. She summarized the steps taken so far. Tracy Hawkins had been placed on immediate administrative leave. An internal investigation was launched, and the passenger video evidence had been preserved and reviewed. Bob Jenkins took a somber breath. "This is serious. The public backlash is intensifying by the hour. We have to issue a statement. Michael, since you're at the center of this, we'd value your input on how to respond. But more importantly, I want to know how you're feeling and what you think is the right course of action." Michael chose his words carefully. "I'm deeply disappointed. We have protocols in place for inclusivity and anti-discrimination, yet this incident shows there are still gaps. This isn't just about me. It's about the values we claim to uphold. Our response should reflect that seriousness. We need to acknowledge the issue, apologize, and commit to tangible changes in training and oversight. And Tracy." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Needs to face consequences aligned with our zero-tolerance policy." Heads nodded around the table. Bob Jenkins added, "I agree. We'll have to ensure that the public understands we won't tolerate any form of discrimination. But let's be thoughtful. We should use this moment to reaffirm our commitment to diversity and inclusivity, not just dole out punishment." For nearly an hour they strategized. PR would release a statement acknowledging the wrongdoing and announcing an internal review. Michael would make a brief video statement about his experience, emphasizing that Delta would take all necessary steps to prevent incidents like this in the future. Additionally, the board would consider an accelerated diversity training program for all flight attendants. The meeting concluded with a resolve to act swiftly and to act big. Tracy Hawkins, meanwhile, sat in her small apartment on the outskirts of Atlanta, numb with shock. Earlier that day, she'd been escorted into her supervisor's office upon landing in New York. She was told to hand in her ID badge, informed she was on administrative leave, and given a ticket back to Atlanta for a mandatory meeting. That meeting never materialized. Instead, she received a phone call informing her that an internal investigation was underway and that she was forbidden from flying any route until further notice. Social media had erupted. Tracy stared at her phone screen, reading hundreds of messages. Some were from friends and relatives asking for her side of the story. Others were hateful or threatening messages from strangers who had seen the viral video. She felt cornered. How had her life spiraled so quickly? She recalled the expression on Michael's face when he revealed he was a director. She'd laughed it off, certain he was lying. But apparently he was telling the truth. A sense of dread twisted in her stomach. If he was indeed a director, he had the power to do exactly what he said, demand her termination. And now, with half the internet on his side, her fate looked grim. But something else gnawed at her conscience. She thought back to their first interaction on the plane. Why had she targeted him? She told herself it was about policy, but deep down, she knew she'd felt a flash of dislike, an inexplicable bias that told her he was a troublemaker. Maybe it was his confident demeanor, or his seat in business class, something she felt he didn't deserve. Or maybe it was the color of his skin. The truth stung like a slap. Days turned into a whirlwind of public scrutiny. Major news outlets picked up the story, replaying the video clip of Tracy refusing to serve Michael water. Some outlets labeled it a clear case of racism. Others framed it as yet another instance of customer service gone wrong. Talk shows debated how systemic bias seeps into everyday interactions. Social media was rife with hashtags calling for Tracy's firing, and by extension, accountability from Delta. Michael gave a measured statement on national TV. He stood behind a podium with the Delta logo in the background, calmly recounting the flight. "I take no pleasure in this situation," he said, addressing a throng of microphones. "As a black man in a position of leadership, I've experienced discrimination before, but I never expected it from within my own organization. That said, Delta is bigger than one employee's actions. We're committed to making this a turning point." As part of the corporate response, Delta announced a mandatory refresher course on inclusivity for all flight crew and staff. We want to ensure that every passenger, regardless of race or background, is treated with respect, the statement read. Public sentiment was cautiously optimistic. Some applauded the airline for responding decisively. Others remained skeptical, pointing out that such training programs often fail to change deeply ingrained biases. Meanwhile, Michael's internal influence paved the way for a broader culture shift. He convened a task force pulling in data about passenger complaints related to discrimination. The numbers were unsettling. While not astronomical, there were enough incidents to suggest a pattern. Michael and the task force members discussed everything from improved hiring practices to more robust accountability measures. If there was a silver lining to this fiasco, it was the opportunity for lasting institutional reform. Tracy's fate hung in limbo. She had one meeting after another with HR representatives, each time presenting her version of events. She insisted she didn't deny Michael water because he was black, but rather because she believed there was a limit on supplies. He was demanding she told them, though her words sounded weak, even to her own ears. The investigators weren't convinced. They had passenger statements, video evidence, and even testimony from Serena and Captain Jorgensen indicating that she singled Michael out for poor treatment. Moreover, the internal review uncovered that Tracy had previously received a written warning for showing favoritism to certain passengers. That incident hadn't escalated to this level, but it painted a pattern. HR was building a case. A letter arrived at Tracy's apartment on a Friday afternoon, stamped with the Delta Airlines emblem. Her heart thudded. She knew it was coming, but hoped for leniency. She tore open the envelope with trembling fingers. The letter was straightforward. Effective immediately her employment with Delta was terminated. The reasons cited included breach of company policy, unprofessional conduct, and a direct violation of Delta's core value of inclusivity. She stared at the words as if they were foreign, not fully grasping the finality of it. Her phone rang moments later. It was a call from her union representative confirming that the termination had been finalized. She could appeal, but given the evidence, the union saw little chance of reversing the decision. Tracy sank onto her couch, tears burning her eyes. Her dream job, flying around the world wearing the crisp uniform, was gone undone by her own behavior. For the first time in her life, she felt the full weight of consequences pressing down relentlessly, and she had only herself to blame. News of Tracy's termination spread quickly. For many, it was seen as a form of hard karma. The flight attendant who denied a black man a simple glass of water had lost her livelihood. Some online voices rejoiced, seeing it as a just outcome for her open display of prejudice. Others pitied her, arguing that perhaps a suspension or mandatory sensitivity training could have sufficed. But the general consensus was clear: she had crossed a line that warranted strict repercussions. Michael learned of the decision through an internal memo before it became public. His reaction was complex. He felt a sense of relief that the airline was standing firmly by its policies, but he also harbored a trace of sadness. As a leader, he never relished destroying someone's career. He would have preferred that she learned from her mistakes and changed her behavior. But her attitude on the plane and her subsequent refusal to accept responsibility made it difficult to see a path toward reconciliation. In the aftermath, Michael found himself reflecting on how personal and corporate ethics intersect. He believed in second chances, but only if the individual demonstrated a willingness to learn and grow. Tracy had been defiant until the end, and her unwillingness to own up to her prejudice sealed her fate. If anything, her termination served as a powerful statement that Delta at least would not shield employees who tarnished its reputation through discriminatory acts. Outside of corporate boardrooms and social media debates, however, the world carried on. Flights took off and landed, passengers navigated TSA lines, and flight attendants new and old continued serving drinks and peanuts at 35,000 feet. Yet under the surface, a subtle but meaningful shift had occurred. Delta's employees, especially flight attendants, whispered about the incident in break rooms and training sessions. For some, it was a wake-up call, a realization that prejudice, no matter how small or disguised, could lead to severe consequences. In the weeks following Tracy's termination, Michael was invited to speak at diversity forums and leadership conferences. The topic of corporate accountability for racial bias had become more urgent, and his story served as a potent example. He traveled to universities' community centers and airline symposiums, often wearing a pin of Delta's logo as a reminder that large organizations could change from within. His message was consistent. We can't afford to ignore the small acts of discrimination that happen every day. Whether it's denying a passenger water or making assumptions about someone's qualifications, these microaggressions pile up and erode trust. A single employee can represent an entire company in the public eye. So we have to choose employees who share our values and reinforce that those values are non-negotiable. He also emphasized the importance of not demonizing every individual who makes a mistake. Retribution alone doesn't solve anything, he would say. Education, introspection, and systemic overhaul are the lasting solutions. However, when someone refuses to acknowledge wrongdoing, we must protect the organization's core principles. Meanwhile, Delta pushed ahead with widespread training initiatives. In mandatory workshops, flight attendants practiced conflict resolution, learned about unconscious bias, and engaged in role-playing exercises. Surveys measured changes in staff attitudes over time. Though no single training could eradicate every bias, the airline aimed to foster a culture where employees would call each other out on discriminatory behavior. And for Michael, this was a step in the right direction, an evolving demonstration that large corporations could indeed learn from their mistakes. Amid this flurry of professional obligations, Michael also wrestled with personal feelings. The incident had dredged up old memories of discrimination, ones he had neatly tucked away, but never fully reconciled. Nights found him staring at the ceiling, recalling the scornful looks he'd received in college, or the extra scrutiny from shop owners when he browsed expensive stores. He realized that even with his esteemed title and business-class seat, he was not immune to prejudice. The reality stung, but also fortified his resolve to fight it at every level. He occasionally wondered what had happened to Tracy after her dismissal. Had she learned any lesson, or would she remain bitter, blaming others for her downfall? The question lingered in his mind, though he never attempted to contact her. The damage done was too severe, and their roles within the airline had severed any chance of a private conversation. Yet he caught himself hoping she'd find some path to redemption, if not for her sake, then for the sake of society at large. One day, while reading through employee feedback from the new training program, Michael paused at a comment from an anonymous flight attendant who expressed gratitude for the reforms sparked by the water incident. The attendant wrote, "I never realized how some of my everyday decisions could be influenced by bias. This training made me question my assumptions about people. I'm trying to be more careful and kind." Tears pricked the corners of Michael's eyes, evidence that change, however small, was happening. In a twist of fate, Michael learned that Linda, the attorney who had recorded the incident, had filed a formal complaint with the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, as well. She argued that discriminatory practices in airlines posed a safety risk, as they could escalate conflicts mid-flight. While it seemed like a stretch, her complaint garnered attention. The FAA, at minimum, opened discussions with major airlines about standardizing protocols for handling passenger needs to prevent bias-driven decisions. Michael saw potential in Linda's approach. When safety and discrimination intersect, regulators pay attention, he told his colleagues. So he collaborated with her to draft a policy proposal recommending that airlines adopt clearer guidelines for in-flight services. The proposal aimed to define acceptable reasons for denying a passenger a basic amenity like water, emphasizing that any refusal based on prejudice would trigger immediate investigation. This new angle of reform gained traction. Other airlines reached out to Michael and Linda, expressing interest in adopting standardized practices. It was a heartening development. Despite the painful incident, the conversation about racism in the skies was advancing, and Michael was determined not to let the momentum slip away. Tracy, meanwhile, hit rock bottom. Her termination made it nearly impossible to secure a new job in the airline industry. Word travels fast. Even smaller regional airlines balked at hiring someone implicated in a high-profile discrimination case. Debt loomed overhead, and she found herself applying for part-time retail jobs just to keep afloat. Her life of aspiring to see the world had shriveled into the stark reality of barely making rent. One day, after another fruitless round of job applications, she slumped onto her threadbare couch and switched on the TV. An interview with Michael Braxton was playing on a news channel. He spoke about turning negative experiences into catalysts for institutional change. Tracy watched in pained fascination as he detailed new training modules and policy reforms. It struck her how composed and genuine he seemed, how he emphasized improvement over punishment. And then he said something that made her heart clench. "I didn't want her to lose her livelihood," Michael admitted. "But her refusal to acknowledge she was wrong made it impossible for us to keep her. If an employee can't see that serving water is a fundamental courtesy and that denying it on account of bias is reprehensible, then they don't belong in a service industry." Tracy felt tears slip down her cheeks. Hearing him say he didn't want her fired cut deeper than if he'd gloated over her downfall. She realized she'd painted him as a vindictive figure, yet here he was urging compassion, but also accountability. In that moment, something in her cracked a layer of defensiveness she'd been clinging to. The full weight of her mistake crushed her, leaving her sobbing quietly on the couch. Weeks later, an unexpected letter arrived at Delta's HR department. It was from Tracy Hawkins. In a raw, handwritten note, she apologized for her conduct, stating that she had reflected deeply on her actions. She acknowledged that her denial of water to Michael was rooted in bias, even if she hadn't fully understood it at the time. "I realize I singled him out unfairly," she wrote. "I blamed him for being demanding, but in truth my own prejudice fueled my hostility. I'm sorry for the pain and embarrassment I caused him and the airline." Melissa Kramer brought the letter to Michael's attention. "I think you should read this," she said gently, handing him the page. Michael scanned the words, feeling a swirl of emotions, surprise, relief, and a cautious optimism. He noted that Tracy didn't ask for her job back. She merely expressed remorse. "Do you think it's sincere?" Michael asked Melissa. She shrugged. "Hard to say for sure, but it seems genuine enough to me." He mulled over the letter. Part of him wanted to set it aside and move on. Another part recognized how rare it was for someone to own up to a mistake, this publicly, especially after facing such a harsh consequence. In the end, he decided to send Tracy a brief note in response, thanking her for her apology and expressing hope that she would grow from the experience. He offered no promises of reinstatement. He lacked the authority to unilaterally reverse a termination, but he felt that acknowledging her letter was the right thing to do. Time wore on, and the heated public discourse around the incident gradually cooled. Delta continued rolling out new training modules, while other airlines explored adopting similar policies. Michael's personal role as a champion for equitable treatment in the skies grew, winning him respect, both inside and outside the aviation community. He was invited to speak at a congressional hearing on travel regulations, where he advocated for more transparent guidelines that prevent discriminatory practices at airports and aboard flights. One afternoon, Bob Jenkins called Michael into his office with news. "We want to formalize a new position, Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. You'd still retain your board seat and executive responsibilities, but this role would allow you to spearhead change across all departments. We believe you're the perfect candidate." Michael felt a surge of excitement. This was his chance to transform a negative encounter into a lasting legacy, ensuring that no passenger would endure discrimination under Delta's wings. He accepted on the spot, shaking Bob's hand with gratitude. A press release soon followed, highlighting the new position and Michael's mission to reinforce Delta's commitment to inclusive travel. Though the memory of Tracy's act still weighed heavily on him, he found solace in the progress unfolding around him. Change was never swift or simple, but the airline industry's willingness to adapt gave him hope. If a single glass of water could spark a global conversation about racial bias in travel, perhaps real transformation was indeed possible. One flight at a time. Weeks turned into months. Michael's new role had him traveling often, meeting with ground staff pilots and flight attendants worldwide. He listened to their experiences, their complaints, and their ideas for fostering more inclusivity. In these interactions, he sometimes encountered subtle pushback people who felt the training was a waste of time or an overreaction. Yet he also found many more who embraced the new culture wholeheartedly. During a flight from Paris to Atlanta, Michael sat in the jump seat, chatting with a young flight attendant from Brazil. She told him about the changes she'd noticed. "People are more careful with how they treat passengers," she said. "We talk openly about unconscious biases now, and we watch out for each other. It's like we're all a little more aware that kindness and fairness aren't optional. They're part of the job." Michael smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest. Moments like this validated all the heartbreak and turmoil. He thought back to that day on the plane, how a simple request for water had set this chain of events into motion. It wasn't how he would have chosen to effect change, but sometimes life chooses for you. Stepping off the plane in Atlanta, he reflected on the journey from being denied water to spearheading an airline-wide initiative for equity. He realized that while hard karma had indeed struck Tracy, the ripple effect reached far beyond punishing one person's wrongdoing. It touched countless employees, policy frameworks, and eventually other airlines. For every door that prejudice tried to close, there was now a window of opportunity for education and empathy. And perhaps that was the biggest victory of all. Months later, Michael learned that Tracy had completed a diversity training program offered by a non-profit organization. In an unexpected turn, she landed a job at a regional airline, though not in a flight attendant role. She worked in customer service, assisting passengers over the phone. Rumor had it that she performed her duties with newfound sensitivity and compassion. It seemed she had taken Michael's words to heart. Accountability can be a catalyst for growth. On a crisp autumn morning, Michael received a short email from her. She wrote, "Mr. Braxton, I just wanted to say, I'm truly sorry once again. I know I hurt you and betrayed the values of Delta. Thank you for acknowledging my apology before. I'm working hard to become a better person." Michael read the email twice, taking a deep breath. He typed back a brief reply. "Thank you for letting me know. I wish you well in your journey forward." With that, he closed the chapter, grateful that even the most painful stories could find a measure of redemption. When he stepped out of his office that day, the sky overhead was clear and blue, reminiscent of the open skies he so often traveled. In it, he saw infinite possibilities for change. He knew that the fight against discrimination was far from over, but with each policy enacted, each person educated, and each attitude reshaped, they moved closer to a world where no one would be denied a glass of water or anything else because of the color of their skin. And that he thought was worth every ounce of drama, heartbreak, and triumph along the way. Thank you for joining me on this intense emotional journey of redemption, accountability, and unyielding hope. If this story resonated with you, if it stirred your sense of justice or reminded you that change is possible even in the face of blatant prejudice, please take a moment to support this channel. Your likes, shares, and subscriptions help shine a spotlight on the stories that matter, inspiring conversations around fairness, compassion, and the pursuit of a better world for all. Let's stand together against discrimination in all its forms. By doing so, we become catalysts for transformation in our communities, workplaces, and beyond. So hit that like button, share this video with your friends and family, and subscribe for more thought-provoking stories. Your voice can make a difference. Thank you, and see you in the next video.